Tonight I'm going to tell you a bit about The Disappearing Poem, which is Agrippa, A Book of the Dead by William Gibson. Now, Gibson was a science fiction writer, born in the early half of the 19th century. And I first encountered his work, Agrippa, late one night poking around on Wikipedia. I wasn't searching for anything in particular, but found myself reading an article entitled The History of the Internet. And it was there that I first discovered Gibson. Gibson's credited with first using the term cyberspace. He used it to describe a sort of mass hallucination that the fictional citizens of his world were participating in. So if you've ever seen The Matrix, you're kind of familiar with Gibson's ideas already, as the film drew kind of quite heavily on Gibson's book Neuromancer to kind of create its themes and ideas. Agrippa is a short poem, about 300 lines long, which was published on a floppy disk. The disk itself was housed in an ornately bound book, as you can see here, with illustrations by an artist called Dennis Ashbaugh. Ashbaugh was one of the first people to use DNA sequencing images to create his sort of abstract works. Agrippa focuses on Gibson's memories of his father, who died when he was 6. Gibson, searching through the kind of family home much later on in his life, found this Kodak family album, which was called Agrippa, which is where the title of the poem comes from. And it was sort of made by his grandfather and contained pictures of his grandfather in the sort of early 1920s America, along with Gibson's father in his youth. The poem was an attempt to kind of reconstitute images into textual form from this photo album. The story moves from Gibson's grandfather's life to Gibson's father's life to Gibson's life himself. From moving from small town middle America in 1920s onwards into the summer of love of the 1960s, and much later into Gibson's adult life. The part of the poem that I found most interesting was that once you had finished loading the program contained on the floppy disk, and once the text of the poem had displayed in full, it would encrypt itself and the program would self-destruct, meaning that you could only read the poem once. So it was one of the first original self-destructing messages. If you've ever seen Mission Impossible, where Tom Cruise gets his shades and then he chucks them away after 10 seconds, that's sort of where the idea comes from. The poem was also broadcast in a reading, which was put out on NPR radio in the early 90s. And Gibson sort of prefaced the reading of the poem by saying, "Listen up, I'll say this only once." So the medium of a self-destructing message was a reflection of the poem's theme. The poem was about the decaying memories of Gibson's father, the memories that he never made of his grandfather, and the sort of merging of those tales into something that couldn't quite capture the subjective experience of actually knowing his father. Copies of the software were distributed on bulletin boards, and a number of physical copies were produced, which you can kind of see here. And of course, many people, early adopters of the internet, took Agrippa's one-way encryption as sort of a challenge and attempted to break the code. So it's no surprise that the very next day, the poem itself in full text was posted online. But it was only due to the fact that there was a group of NYU students at the broadcast who made a surreptitious recording of the reading and transcribed it by hand into a text file. So the encryption itself wasn't broken, even though they had claimed to have done so. It wasn't solved until about 20 years later, in 2012, which you can see some of the photos from the winning submission here. But yeah, it took a team of computer scientists at the University of Toronto to put out a technical challenge. With this, they kind of submitted a bit-for-bit copy of the Agrippa application, unread, compiled on Mac System 7. I don't know if anyone has ever had the pleasure of using that, but it's not great. So yeah, the winning submission by Robert Zhao, if you want to have a look, it's all online. He kind of figured out how the encryption worked, broke it down, got the plain text to confirm that it was the one that the NYU students had posted online, and kind of broke down how the application worked. So you can see here the sort of random characters and non-Unicode loveliness that's going on over here. But this actually wasn't an encryption, so to speak. The way that it worked was, after the poem had been read and brought through the memory, it was a simple substitution cipher. We've been doing some katas on Caesar ciphers. It was basically a Caesar cipher that replaced the single letter with a string of Unicode characters to kind of represent it. So it was a bit of an illusion, a bit of a red herring that the anonymous programmer who designed the program kind of did to throw people off the scent. And yes, so the program ran only once, and the way that they achieved that was they told the program to overwrite itself at key points with a 6,000 character string of letters, which meant that the program couldn't be run again as it was missing key parts that it needed to kind of move forward. I find the idea of the self-destructing text really fascinating, because it's almost a misnomer to say that it is destroyed. Obviously, I'm here talking about it today, but it kind of just went from being transferred from computer memory into physical memory. And I think that's a great testament to people's desire to preserve information, to keep it free, and also to how mischievous hackers can be. That the author intended to kind of create this mystic and elusive document that was by design meant to be forgotten, I just think that was subverted is nasty, but very interesting for us to talk about, at least. I wanted to finish on this slide, a quote from the publisher, which was from an interview that was made just before the broadcast in 1992. And I'm very thankful that I didn't have to hire a technical team to reconstruct the computer language of the MacBook Power 7. And also that you can get one on eBay for around 50 quid if you wanted to have a look at what GUI was like in the 1990s. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. I've put all my links here on the final slide if anyone would like to have a look at the talk itself or see the transmission. But yeah, I'd encourage you to read the poem. It's quite interesting, and I think it's a fantastic testament to the idea of temporariness in human memory and how ephemeral things designed to be forgotten, can end up becoming eternal. So yeah, thank you all very much.